The first time she tripped, the entire room froze. A crystal glass shattered across the polished marble floor. Important documents scattered through the air, and every armed guard instinctively reached for their weapons. In the center of the silence stood a nervous young woman with trembling hands, her cheeks burning with embarrassment as she whispered, an apology that almost no one could hear. Everyone expected the Sicilian Mafia boss to end her employment before the day was over, just as he had done with every secretary before her. No secretary had ever lasted a week in his organization. Most left in fear. Some simply disappeared without saying goodbye. Yet no one could have imagined that this clumsy young woman would slowly become the one person capable of changing. A man whose heart had been buried beneath years of grief, violence, and loneliness. Before we continue this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in hope, and subscribe to Soulful Tales2 if you believe that kindness and second chances can transform even the hardest hearts. Morning sunlight poured over the beautiful Sicilian hills, lighting vineyards, stone villages, and narrow roads that twisted toward an enormous estate. Surrounded by ancient olive trees, hidden behind towering gates stood the mansion of Vincenzo Moretti, a feared mafia boss whose reputation stretched far beyond Italy. Newspapers described him as ruthless. Rivals feared speaking his name aloud. Even his own employees walked through the mansion with careful steps, terrified of making the smallest mistake. The position of personal secretary had become almost legendary because nobody managed to survive the pressure for more than a few days. Every schedule had to be perfect. Every document had to be flawless. Every meeting had to happen without delay. One tiny error meant immediate dismissal. Meanwhile, several miles away, 24-year-old Mireya Salvi stood outside a small apartment building, holding a worn leather folder filled with resumes and recommendation letters. Life had never been generous to her. After losing both parents in a traffic accident during her teenage years, she had worked countless temporary jobs just to support herself and her elderly grandmother. Despite earning excellent grades in business administration, employers constantly overlooked her because of her nervous personality and her tendency to stumble over almost everything. She dropped coffee, misplaced pens, bumped into doors, and accidentally knocked things from shelves. People often laughed at her before giving her another chance. Yet beneath her awkwardness lived extraordinary determination and endless compassion. She believed every person deserved patience because life had already been difficult enough without constant judgment. When Mireya unexpectedly received an invitation to interview at the Moretti estate, she assumed it was a mistake. Friends begged her not to go after hearing frightening stories about the powerful family. Still, desperation pushed her forward. Her grandmother's medical bills continued growing, and eviction notices had begun appearing beneath their apartment door. This opportunity, dangerous as it seemed, represented the only chance to keep their tiny family together. The mansion looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Uniformed guards examined every document before allowing her through the massive gates. Inside, priceless paintings decorated long hallways while sunlight streamed through tall windows, making the elegant rooms glow peacefully. Despite the tension that filled every corner, everything seemed perfect except for the people, whose anxious expressions suggested they lived under constant pressure. During the interview, Mireya accidentally spilled water across the polished conference table before she even finished introducing herself. She apologized repeatedly while trying to clean the mess, only to knock an expensive fountain pen onto the floor. Several executives exchanged disappointed looks, convinced the interview had already ended. Then the heavy doors opened and Vincenzo Moretti entered. Tall, calm, and sharply dressed in a dark tailored suit, Vincenzo carried himself with quiet authority. A thin scar crossed one side of his face, silently hinting at a painful past. His cold gray eyes rarely revealed emotion, yet they immediately noticed something unusual about the embarrassed young woman standing before him. Unlike everyone else, she looked genuinely ashamed of her mistakes rather than frightened of his reputation. Against every expectation, he hired her. The mansion staff could hardly believe the decision. They quietly predicted she would not survive until Friday. The prediction nearly came true. On her first morning, Mireya mixed up appointment folders, accidentally served tea instead of coffee during an important meeting. and tripped over a decorative rug while carrying confidential files. Every mistake seemed larger than the last. Guards rolled their eyes whenever they saw her approaching. Senior staff whispered that another replacement would soon arrive. Yet something strange happened. Instead of making excuses, Mireya accepted responsibility every single time. She stayed late correcting errors, organized forgotten paperwork, learned everyone's names, and thanked even the gardeners for their hard work. She noticed the exhausted kitchen staff rarely had time for lunch, so she quietly prepared sandwiches for them. She helped an elderly cleaner carry heavy buckets without being asked. She remembered birthdays, listened when people spoke, and smiled even after exhausting days. Slowly, the atmosphere inside the mansion began changing. Employees who had once rushed silently through hallways started, greeting one another. Laughter occasionally echoed from the staff kitchen during lunch breaks. Even the guards seemed slightly less tense. Vincenzo noticed every change. Although he rarely spoke outside official business, he observed Mireya carefully. She treated wealthy executives and maintenance workers with identical respect. She never gossiped. She never complained. Even after another embarrassing accident, she simply smiled awkwardly and tried again. One bright afternoon, Vincenzo found her sitting beneath an olive tree during her lunch break, feeding breadcrumbs to injured birds. One tiny sparrow rested peacefully in her hands while she carefully wrapped its damaged wing using soft cloth from her handkerchief. She looked completely unaware that one of Sicily's most feared men stood watching quietly from several feet away. For reasons he could not explain, the image stayed with him throughout the day. As weeks passed, Mireya gradually mastered the complicated responsibilities of her position. She still dropped folders occasionally and bumped into furniture now and then, but her confidence slowly replaced constant fear. She learned Vincenzo preferred meetings scheduled early in the morning because afternoons reminded him of painful memories. She noticed he always skipped lunch despite working endless hours. Without mentioning it, she began leaving healthy meals in his office every day. At first, they remained untouched. Then one afternoon, she noticed an empty plate. The smallest victories often become the beginning of extraordinary change. Unknown to most employees, Vincenzo carried invisible wounds far deeper than the scar on his face. Years earlier, his younger sister had died during violence between rival criminal families. Since then, he had buried every emotion beneath strict discipline and emotional distance. He convinced himself that caring about people only created unbearable pain. Mireya unknowingly challenged that belief every single day. One rainy morning, an elderly groundskeeper collapsed while trimming trees near the entrance. Before anyone else reacted, Mireya ran across the courtyard despite the pouring rain, knelt beside him, called emergency services, and stayed holding his hand until medical help arrived. Her clothes became soaked, her hair clung to her face, and mud covered her shoes. But she never once thought about herself. Watching from the mansion steps, Vincenzo experienced something unfamiliar. Respect. Not because she acted bravely, because she acted without expecting recognition. After that day, their professional relationship slowly transformed into quiet. Friendship built on mutual trust, rather than words. They rarely discussed personal matters, yet shared peaceful moments, reviewing schedules beneath sunlit balconies, or walking through the estate gardens. During calm afternoons, Mireya never asked about his past, and Vincenzo appreciated the silence. Then danger arrived unexpectedly. A rival organization attempted to exploit information, leaking from inside the estate. Suspicion spread through every department. Employees accused one another. Fear returned almost overnight. Evidence seemed to point toward Mireya after confidential documents disappeared shortly after. Passing through her office, everyone believed the clumsy secretary had finally made the mistake that would end everything. Instead of defending herself with anger, she calmly allowed investigators to examine every drawer, every computer file, and every notebook she owned. Hours later, security footage revealed the truth. Another employee had secretly stolen the documents while Mireya helped deliver emergency supplies to the kitchen. After a burst, water pipe flooded part of the mansion. She had been innocent all along. The realization deeply affected Vincenzo. He understood how easily fear had almost destroyed the one truly honest person remaining inside his organization. That evening, as warm daylight faded gently across the vineyards, he made the most important decision of his life. He began dismantling the criminal operations that had defined his family's legacy for generations. It would take years and enormous sacrifice, but for the first time, he believed a different future might actually exist. Legitimate businesses replaced illegal enterprises. Scholarships funded local schools. Medical clinics opened in nearby villages. Former employees received opportunities to build honest careers. Many people assumed such dramatic change resulted from strategy or political pressure. The truth was much simpler. One endlessly kind young woman had reminded a broken man that compassion required far greater courage than fear. Mireya never considered herself extraordinary. She still occasionally tripped over staircases, dropped paperwork, and laughed at her own awkward moments. Yet everyone around her now understood that perfection had never been her greatest strength. Her greatest gift was seeing humanity where others saw weakness. Years later, visitors arriving at the Moretti estate no longer encountered silent halls filled with anxiety. Instead, they found bright gardens blooming beneath clear daytime skies, smiling employees working proudly together, and children from nearby villages visiting educational programs funded by the estate. The mansion that once symbolized fear had quietly become a place of hope. People often asked Vincenzo what inspired such remarkable transformation. He would simply glance toward the cheerful woman organizing community events somewhere, across the courtyard, probably carrying too many folders and trying not to trip over her own feet, before allowing himself a small smile that few people ever witnessed. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, the richest, or the most feared. Sometimes strength belongs to the one who keeps choosing kindness after life has given every reason to stop. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, share it with your loved ones, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Soulful Tales 2 so more people can discover stories that remind us compassion still exists in this world. Special request, comment, kindness changes everything. If you believe one caring heart can transform countless lives, the world often celebrates power, wealth, and influence. But the greatest changes usually begin with quiet acts of kindness that nobody notices at first. Mireya never planned to change a feared man's destiny. She simply refused to let hardship steal her compassion. In return, her gentle heart transformed not only one lonely soul, but an entire community that finally found hope where fear had ruled for generations. And perhaps that is the greatest reminder of all, that no matter how broken a person may seem, kindness offered with patience and sincerity can become the light that leads them home.